Ancient peoples, paths crossing since the Inquisition, the Jews and the Turks. From the dead seeds of the Ottoman Empire, a sapling republic claims neutrality in the Second World War. From the evil of the Third Reich, Jews, fleeing persecution and slaughter, seek a sanctuary. In an ancient land, in desperate hours, some will find a safe haven.
I owed my life to Turkey.
A place to shape a future pope.
What he changes is the attitude of the Catholic Church toward the Jews.
The scene of an impossible mission.
The idea was to transfer 1 million Jews in return for 10,000 drachs.
And a base of operation.
If you're trying to save all Jews, then Turkey becomes a very, very important point.
And for that, Istanbul was the right place.
This is the little-known story of Turkey and the Holocaust, of what happened here and abroad, of what it did and what it could not do, as the world around it plunged into darkness. Adolf Hitler makes little secret of his hatred for the Jews. In his book, Mein Kampf, he calls Jews parasites and promises their destruction in what necessarily must be a bloody process. When he comes to power in January 1933, he wastes little time making good on that promise. On April 1st, the boycotting of Jewish businesses. April 7th, the expulsion of Jews from the civil service, including professors at state universities. May 10th, Hitler's 100th day in office. Thousands of Nazi students storm university libraries and bookstores. In an effort to purify German culture, hundreds of thousands of books deemed un-Germanic are burned in bonfires. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, proclaims, "The days of hair-splitting Jewish intellectualism are dead. The past lies in flames." Those who foresee the coming doom question not whether to leave, but where in the world to go.
Turkey, over the centuries, was always a source of refuge for people who were in trouble elsewhere. Even when the Ottoman Empire was established, Jews were being persecuted not only in Spain, but in the rest of Western Europe.
The emperor in those days, very religious man, and he opened the borders, and then many Jews came to Turkey.
My family came to Turkey in 1492, the end of the 15th century. They left the port of Cadiz, today's Spain, and came first to Saloniki. It was the Ottoman Sultan who sent his naval fleet to get the Jews that were expelled from Spain. and they settled in Saloniki first.
The Jews are recognized by the Ottoman Sultan as useful for bringing Western ideas to his empire.
The Jews that came in 1492 brought with them the printing press, the notion of steel that came from Toledo, casting, tinting, and weaving, and everything was very modern with them for the time.
But by the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire has descended into decay. Fighting a war for independence and ousting the last Sultan in 1923, a young, charismatic leader, Kemal Atatürk, establishes a constitutional republic basing it on democracy and secularism.
Kemal Atatürk was changing the education system, he was changing the writing, he was changing the laws, he was changing virtually everything in the country, making it a Western-oriented country, and it was a great challenge.
As soon as Atatürk had established the new Turkish Republic, he was trying to modernize the university to make it a vehicle for training people who could modernize various aspects of Turkish life.
Atatürk'ün Türkiye'yi
Istanbul University existed before, but Atatürk wanted to correct it and change the curriculum.
He needed an entirely new faculty.
The talented men Hitler discards, Atatürk wants to recruit.
Atatürk was in touch with a person in Switzerland to obtain staff for the new university that he wanted to set up.
Atatürk's contact is an Austrian-born Jewish professor, Dr. Philipp Schwartz, whose premonition of the horrors to come compels him to establish the Emergency Organization of German Scientists Abroad, an agency devoted to aiding scientists and intellectuals displaced by the Nazis.
So one of the things that happened was the idea of getting Jewish professors and professionals who had lost their jobs and bringing them to Turkey to staff the universities.
On July 5th, 1933, Schwartz meets with Atatürk's Minister of Education. Schwartz writes, "These hours had a meaning like being born again for the professors of Germany." The professors are granted 3-year extendable contracts, permitting them to bring their families and assistants. The meeting concludes with the Minister of Education exclaiming, "Bring your science and methods, show our youngsters the path of knowledge."
They came here with their children, with their wives, but of these immigrants, not all were Jews. Many of them were also Christians.
Over 200 academic exiles immigrate to Turkey. 2/3 of them are Jews, at least by Nazi racial definitions.
They were in the Department of Law, they were in medicine, they were in political science, they were in linguistics, they were in dentistry, in all the fields.
Well, my father lost his job in 1933, just as Hitler took over. He was one of the people who saw the handwriting on the wall and said, we have to get somewhere else, at least for a while.
It developed that my father, as part of a group of German academics, was invited to teach at the University of Istanbul.
My father had been dismissed from his job at the university as soon as the Germans had taken over the Sudetenlands after Munich.
Other distinguished scholars and intellectuals brought to Turkey include Alexander Rustov, prominent economist, Ernst Reuter, professor of political science, who will become Berlin's first post-war mayor, and Erich Auerbach, Roman philology expert, who will write Mimesis while in Istanbul, a major work of literary criticism.
He lived in Bebek in the house where they have those lions at the door. He wrote his famous book, Mimesis.
Another influential professor is law professor Dr. Andreas Schwartz. His assistant, Turkan Rado, the first female law professor at Istanbul University, will influence generations of Turkish law students and politicians.
Dr. Schwartz gave comparative law lessons that included Roman law. Schwartz inspired the Turkish Supreme Court. All teachers, including myself, came to teach civil law with the system of Schwartz.
And there has been very famous professors I still remember today. For instance, Professor Neumark, economy.
I first saw Fritz Neumark during the entrance exam to the university. He stopped by my side and he said, "My God, what a beautiful handwriting you have."
We had a lot of relationships with the foreign professors, and we respected them so much.
Most of them were very, very famous professors who would never have dreamt to come to Turkey. They were quite arrogant, I must say. Very proud of themselves.
Of course, we were happy that they were there.
With more than triple the salaries of their Turkish colleagues, the new staff finds housing at scenic Bebek, forming a culturally distinct, close-knit refugee community.
We used to listen to the BBC News from London. It was mainly the war that we talked about. Hitler's running over country after country. Compared to what people in Europe had to suffer, Turkey was a wonderful place, there's no question.
The transition to Turkey for me was dramatic in the sense that I had to say goodbye to our family. Wonderful in the sense that I came to a totally new environment which was beautiful, that I felt we were out of the oppression and the danger zone.
It was a very quiet time. Turkey it was a very secure atmosphere, I would say. Everybody found for himself some possibilities to do whatever he was interested in, sports or whatever it was.
My mother and Matt's mother went up to Uludağ for skiing in the winter. We loved to go to the Uludağ. That was one of the greatest activities.
It was a wonderful life in many ways for a young boy growing up because of the outdoors and the lovely climate and the sea and everything that went with it.
Enjoying their security in Turkey, the children of the immigrant circle passed through adolescence.
My sister and I had been brought up on German and Czech, but we went to these schools. Schools by Turkish law had to teach half the day in Turkish and half the day in English. So the worst day of my life was going to school on that first day and having to learn two languages at once. It was quite traumatic.
I learned dancing in the home of my future wife. We both met in Istanbul, in Bebek, and both went to the American college. We're really college sweethearts in that sense. Dating, that was a word we didn't know.
And an activity we didn't do.
As they form new bonds in Turkey, some maintain cultural ties with the past through language and music.
The professors became friends of my father. He invited many of them to our home. I admired them when I was in my father's shop and they entered and then they say, this is Professor Neumark, this is Professor Schwarz.
To maintain some German cultural presence, so I had violin lessons and I was part of the string quartet. And it was performed among this small group of immigrants in somebody's home.
I liked their way of life. It was something very, very different, a European way of life.
Contagious, their melodies spread into the culture. An invitation to reform Turkish music education to European standards is accepted by Paul Hindemith, a German composer. Hindemith recruits several German artists in his crusade. Among them is former director of the Berlin Opera, Karl Ebert. He founds the State Opera and Ballet and improves the state theaters. Not only does his vision reshape the performers on stage, but the stage itself. Determined to design a new theater, Ebert seeks out the assistance of a master architect, Clemens Holzmeister.
Holzmeister was an architect doing the ministries and other work in Ankara. He used to rent a large sort of palace-like house, and he used to do his summer work there with his whole studio.
His architectural contributions in Ankara include the General Staff Building, Ministry of National Defense, Ministry of Health, the Presidential Residence, the Parliament, the State Opera and Theatre. The compelling visuals of Ebert and Holzmeister are enhanced by the music of another Hindemith recruit, German professor Eduard Zuckmayer, famous music teacher and pianist. Zuckmayer uses melodies from Turkish folk songs to educate his students. Zuckmayer's love for his students, as well as for Turkey, is captured in this song.
With the love of friendship, we are forever remembered here.
There was a saying that Istanbul University was the best German university outside of Germany.
This bond of love cannot be severed, even if we should scatter throughout the land one day.
Arabs, Jews, it didn't matter. We all sort of played together, we did our homework together.
As I reminisce on this beautiful day, my heart will beat with everlasting love.
I could not imagine having spent a better childhood anywhere else.
The world will reach out to me.
When President Ataturk dies, his reforms are carried on by his successor and longtime friend, İsmet İnönü.
And I still remember the day he died, 10th of November 1938.
Of the year 1940 in Turkey, American journalist Leland Stowe writes, "It seemed the sun had never shone with such warm, life-giving profusion. The war in the West seemed very remote, like the fading, blurred outline of an ugly dream." By the middle of 1941, the German expansion, both by alliance and conquest, falls within 50 miles of Istanbul. It is widely suspected that Germany intends to invade the Soviet Union. But by which route?
We knew that they wanted to go to Russia, and there were two ways to go to Russia, through East Europe or through Turkey. And when they were in the Balkans, we didn't know which way they were going to choose. And we were all, my father was very worried, of course.
President İsmet İnönü blew up the two bridges after the Germans invaded Greece.
We had blackouts. We used to close the windows with drapes at night time.
Every night we were waiting for the Germans.
The Jewish community was very much afraid because the Germans came like hordes.
So we were just praying every day that they wouldn't invade.
I'd look out the window across the Marmara and wonder whether they were coming that night.
people saw the newsreels of what had happened in other countries.
A lot of families left Istanbul and went to Anatolia, thinking that perhaps German troops were going to cross over through Istanbul to Russia.
On June 22nd, 1941, the German army attacks the Soviet Union through Europe, not Turkey.
And I remember the night when it was told to my father that the Germans were going to Russia through Europe. He started to laugh, and he laughed for hours. You know, he was so relieved, so happy.
The threat that passes the Jews in Turkey remains with the Turkish Jews living in occupied Europe. And while most countries ignore the plight of their Jewish citizens caught in the Nazi web, nowhere will the ideals of the Turkish constitution be more nobly upheld than in the actions of its diplomats abroad. At the beginning of World War II, about 10,000 Turkish Jews are living in France.
Many of the Turkish Jews had immigrated to France and elsewhere in Western Europe during and after World War I, during the Turkish War for Independence.
They took the first French boat to France and established themselves, little business here, little business there.
Many Turkish Jews have fully integrated into the culture, becoming French citizens and living happily in France.